What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome, episode 95 of Poppitt's Corner. And this will be a two-parter. I will have the gentleman back on relatively soon, sooner than later, rather. Yeah, so we're going to go through this gentleman's whole career, not in this particular one. This will be part
career.
One. Yeah, part one of two. But the great Matt Harvey of Exhumed and a bunch of other killer bands is joining me. How are you doing today, sir? Thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me. I'm doing good. You know, it's I guess it feels like a Monday, but it was a Tuesday. I had yesterday off work, which was kind of a surprise. So yeah, I'm feeling good, man. Ready for a good week, and always good to speak with you.
Absolutely, my friend. I and thank you in advance for the great birthday present. Today's episode is my birthday present to me. So
is it your birthday today?
Tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Oh, happy birthday. Happy early birthday.
Thank you, sir. So I just want, you're one of the guests I've always wanted to come on and interview on this show. So it's
awesome.
Like I said, thanks for the opportunity. Now how the show works is I'm going to pretty much go through, like I said, your whole career. We'll probably get to about 2011-ish. I know we have about an hour or so I'll try to get to as much stuff as I can. And if you're ready, man, I'd love to get started.
Yeah, fire away, man.
Cool.
This is gonna be interesting.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'll learn something.
Absolutely, they always do. All my guests do. So, walk me through just the first time you remember hearing music, and kind of what did it do for you, and what was the name of the band that you first heard?
You know, my dad is a big music listener, so I mean, there was always music around when I was a kid. The stuff that I think sort of sticks out in my mind, in terms of stuff that sort of stayed with me, was like Cream, Hendrix, some of the early Jefferson Airplane stuff. But I also remember, like, even when I was like a little kid, sort of gravitating towards more like, I guess, dark stuff. I mean, you know, for like a kid, I remember being like, it must have been maybe 4, maybe 5. And there's an old Emerson, Lake and Palmer song called C'est La Vie. And I remember hearing that, and I just, for whatever reason, I thought the lyrics were really relatable, like the whole vibe of it. And I was like, dude, you're like 4, man. That seems really melodramatic. But that one and Behind Blue Eyes by The Who, I remember like really sticking out a lot. And then the Allman Brothers, so it's another big one I remember growing up. And, so I was very much immersed in the world of classic rock, and I was an only child. So like if I was around my parents, I was sort of experiencing their stuff. I wasn't like, it wasn't like they listened to like kids music all the time, or whatever. Mostly I just listened to like little tapes with stories about like the Hulk and Spider-Man and stuff. But if I was around my parents and not other kids, I listened to their stuff. So that's what I heard a lot of, which is classic rock,
Okay. And I'm assuming that stuff was hugely popular on the radio, if we're talking 70s and early 80s.
Sure. Yeah. I was born in 75. So, but mostly, I guess in the radio station, I remember hearing stuff like Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty, like that, like, da 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 da. That's like I was stuck out in my head, like the first Tom Petty record, like Breakdown and stuff like that. That was what was on the radio that my dad was listening to, and then he would just spin records at home. And as a kid, I remember thinking like, oh my god, he has like infinite records. I mean, there's a pretty big record collection, but I've since like more than doubled him. so 600 or 700 records doesn't impress me as like it did when I was a little kid. But it definitely, and my grandma was a music teacher. She was a piano teacher. She used to play in church and at the mortuary. She was Sicilian, very Catholic. And then that was my dad's mom. And then my mom's brother was a jazz fusion guitar player. And he kind of started introducing me to stuff, more like when I had started playing guitar by the time I was like 13 or older. So.
Wow. So okay. So you had been listening to music for like, I guess like 9 years, even before picking up the guitar. Was the guitar that your actual first instrument, or were you taking piano lessons well before that?
I took piano lessons like in first grade, and I really like, if I could go back in time and like give my parents advice on like raising me, I just would have told my mom just like to make me stick with it, because the teacher was like, he's really good. I was only a student in class, like picking out things by ear. Like I remember picking out this was like 81, I guess, 82, whatever year was Chariots of Fire, like won the Oscar. It has that theme, dum da 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 dum
The Yanni
da
theme.
da 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 da. It's Vangelis, but yeah. And so that was something I picked out, and I picked out like the Star Wars theme, and I was sort of like picking things out by ear. And the teacher was like, "Oh, he's the only kid that's picking shit out by ear. Like he should be taking this." And I was like, "No, mom, piano's lame, whatever." And apparently, I kicked up enough of a fuss to where she decided to not make me stick with it. And I didn't really think a lot about music, you know. It was just sort of there. Mostly, I was into reading. I was into like comics, tabletop role-playing games, science fiction, mythology. I also played sports, and then I did like drama in school. And it wasn't really until I had to switch schools in junior high that metal really kind of came to the fore. It was one of those like, my parents were getting divorced. I switched to a new school where I didn't know anybody. And I had a scholarship to like this private elementary school, because I was like, you know, working class kid, but I was smart or whatever. And so I went to this new public school, and all the shit that they were learning, I was like, I learned this in like 5th grade. Like, you guys are all idiots. And so that sort of perfect storm just led to me being like really alienated and angry. And that was right when I was discovering like, you know, master puppets and stuff. So that was the right music for the right time, you know?
Okay, so this was a couple years after. So this was around 86, 87. Now I'm just kind of curious, what about the guitar did it for you? Why not the bass or drums or the tuba or whatever? I'm like, what about the guitar did it for you?
You know, I'm sort of an awful guitar player because like I don't really care about the instrument itself. Like, I mean, I like Segovia or, you know, whatever, but I don't think like, oh, I just love guitar. It's like, no, I just love music and I love metal, and guitar is what you use to make metal. So therefore it was like guitar. Whereas if you would have used, you know, tenor sax, I would have been like, I need a tenor sax. And luckily my dad had an acoustic guitar. You know, he could bang out like a couple of like Yardbirds or like Animals tunes or whatever. And so there was a guitar in the house, and that was convenient too. And you know, I was like, I want to get an electric guitar. And my parents were like, well, there's an acoustic guitar here. I'm like, you can't play Master Puppets on an acoustic guitar. It's stupid. They're like, well, if you play it for a while, then maybe we'll see. And so I picked up the acoustic guitar, and yeah, here we are, you know, many years later.
Well, you could technically play the middle portion of it.
Right. That wasn't really the part that got me excited, but yeah.
Or battery. You could play battery.
Right.
The first part of it. Now, what do you remember the name of the specific acoustic that you were playing on?
Oh yeah, my dad still has it. I mean, it's sort of my guitar, but like sometimes I've had it in my house for years, and then I left it at his house several years ago. It's a 1968 Hofner.
Wow. I bet you that plays really well though, for, you know, those old guitars. Or
it's got a super narrow neck, and which is really great for some things, but sometimes when you got to make like certain chords like an A7, it's hard to get that resonant open G string because the neck is tiny. So that was a really good preparation actually for moving to electric, because most acoustic guitars, the necks are like, you know,
block of wood.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, it's a really great guitar, and every time I go to his house, I mean, even if I just go there to like whatever, pick up old mail or something, I'll still like pick it up and dick around on it.
Did this have like nylon strings on it? Or this is like steel?
It's steel.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. So moving on from there, do you remember your first kind of like rock guitar that you had purchased?
Yeah, we went to We went to the flea market for some reason, and there was like this knockoff SG that was there. And it was only like, I mean, this is $1988, but still it was like $40 or something. And so that was my first electric guitar. And one of my friends had like an amp and a guitar, and he was getting rid of it. And my parents didn't want to get me his guitar, which was like a Charvel. And so I got the amp, but I had this like flea market SG copy and this little amp. And, that was what I started learning more for real on. I would just, play like Seek and Destroy and For Whom the Bell Tolls. And then when I got into Celtic Frost, I played a lot of Celtic Frost songs because even if you've only been playing guitar 6 or 7 months, you can be pretty much sounds similar, like you're executing kind of at the same level. And yeah, so that was what I started out on.
So how did you start getting into all these albums? Because it's like if it's 1988, we don't really have what's called the internet. So you're buying a bunch of imports and whatnot. So was it the record covers that did it for you, and you kind of stumbled upon some of these bands that way, or was it just friends telling you what to kind of get? And you're in the Oakland area, right? So this is a lot of where the Bay Area thrash kind of came from. So I'm assuming most of your friends knew that stuff too.
Well, I mean, I was a very early adopter. I mean, by the time, in 8th grade, I was listening to like Venom and Celtic Frost and Onslaught. And I think I'd gotten like a Bathory tape and SOD and stuff like that. It was pretty heavy. Like I was always listening to stuff that was more extreme than like the other kids in school. But one thing that served me well, really throughout my musical endeavors, is like coming from a background of being a comic book fan. One of the things that you learn really quickly, like once you start reading a lot of comics, you'll be like, Iron Man will be in trouble and he'll go to Avengers Mansion and Captain America won't be there to help him. And it'll say like, because Captain America is like trapped in a mountain, see his own mag issue number, blah, blah, blah. And then you go and cross-reference. And so I had this sort of like research mentality. So I would get one magazine and you'd be able to get turned on to like 4 or 5 bands from that. And then you'd sort of be like, well, Slayer's on Metal Blade and, Sacred Reich is on Metal Blade and the Celtic Frost album is licensed to Metal Blade. So here's a Metal Blade sampler. And then you look at the cassette and you're like, well, this band sounds lame. This band sounds cool. Maybe blah, blah. And so it was like a combination of just reading magazines and, I'd go to the record store and I'd spend like an hour there because I get $10 a week. So it was one tape and like a Slurpee. So it was like I could get one tape that week and I would walk around and I would get like a stack of like 5 or 6 and I would kind of whittle it down and I would look and I'd be like, well, I don't know. And, a lot of times you get great stuff and occasionally you'd be like, oh, fuck. And then sometimes a lot of the stuff that I wasn't that excited about as a kid, I ended up really liking much later. But yeah, it was just a lot of research and it was sort of like a point of pride for me that I knew about more bands than like my friends. And I could always be like, oh, hey, have you heard this? And that was like a cool guy, like cred. Yeah, cred,
Totally. Now, I guess after getting all these influences and kind of picking up the guitar and just learning how to either play chords or just, the riffs that all these bands were playing, when did you decide, hey, I want to start a band?
I kind of like, as soon as the whole point of wanting to play guitar for me was I wanted to like start my own band. I didn't really see the point in it otherwise. I have like I don't know, that's just like my mindset. It always has been. It's like, why bother learning something if you're not going to like do something with it? And so it must have been like 9th grade. There was a kid that lived actually right next door named Chris Baum. And he was a little bit better at guitar than me, and I was a little bit more into metal than he was. And so we would sort of, show each other tapes and stuff. And then he knew another kid that ironically I had gone to school with like in 1st grade, and we played on the same soccer team, this kid named Chad. And Chad's dad was a drummer, and Chad was actually quite a good drummer. He now lives in Las Vegas and plays in bands out there and plays drums. That's what he does for a living. And so the 3 of us would jam, and we all kind of liked, Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer, and stuff. And I was always the guy who was trying to like be like, okay, no, like we need to like, you guys need to sit down and listen to this Onslaught tape. And they would be like, no, you need to sit down and listen to Caress of Steel by Rush. And I'm like, that shit's not fast. It sucks. I was like really single-minded, you know? And so we jammed for a while, and it just became clear that I wanted to do something that was like much like darker and heavier than they did. And so that was like my first attempt at being in a band. We only had like, I think we were like 2 songs or something. I can't remember.
What was the climate around your specific area? Like, did you start to notice, there were a bunch of like heavier shows going on, and would you go to these shows at the age of, I don't know, 13, 14, 15?
Yeah, I started going to shows when I was 13. But where I grew up specifically in San Jose, it was really, really suburban. And it's very spread out. It's a lot like Orange County, to be honest. It's just like houses, strip mall, mall, houses, etc. And it's nothing like Oakland or San Francisco, which are both sort of dense and compact and urban. It was just like kind of a cultural wasteland. And
Okay.
Out of the 3 major cities that were there, it's kind of like San Jose was bereft of really having any like culture to speak of. We had like IBM, that was what we had. So it was really like kind of isolated, like you just, anytime you'd see like an older kid with like a, Metallica shirt or a Slayer shirt, you like try and talk to them and they're like, oh, fuck off. You're like 12. I'm 16. And, so it was very isolated, obviously I knew about Exodus and Testament and all those bands. And then the first show I saw was Anthrax, Exodus, and Halloween in '89.
Wow.
And that was the MTV Headbangers Ball tour. And I think my parents didn't drive us there, but somebody's parents drove us there. And I think it was okay because it was on TV. It was the MTV Headbangers Ball tour. So they're like, well, it's on TV. And I got a flyer. Actually, you might be able to see it behind me. I got the Dark Angel Death Sadist '89 tour flyer that I still have, that I colored in with colored pencil because I was 13. And I brought it home and I was like, but okay, that was cool, but I really want to go to this show. And they're like, my parents looked at the flyer like, fuck no, like get the fuck out of here, kid. Like, no. So it took really until like 1990 to start going to like more club shows. And by then I turned 15 in October 1990, and I started having friends that could drive. And then as long as I kept my grades up, I could go to most gigs. And then once I turned, I think 15 and a half, I got a job. And then it was like, well, I have my own money. My grades are okay. So I can pretty much go to every show.
Absolutely. And around this time too, you had started Exhumed. So just walk me, through like just even choosing the name, because it was a totally different climate. So was it easier for you to choose a name, like a 1-word name back then because they weren't all taken?
Well, we didn't know that there was already Exhumed from Sweden that did a really good demo called Obscurity. And then right about the same time we were starting, there was a band from Riverside called Exhumed that did a tape called Severely Rotted Dead that came out in early '92, right about the same time as our first demo. And to this day, we'll play in Southern California and someone will be like, man, I saw you guys in like '93 at the Showcase Theater. And I was like, no, you didn't. But that's great. That's awesome that you're still into death metal all these years later. But really, we just didn't know Metal Archives to be like, how many Exhumes are there? And I just remember I was sitting in history class in like my sophomore year, and it was we had a really shit teacher. He would just be like, read this chapter, answer these questions. And that was it for the whole period. So I would be like, I'd do the work in like 10 minutes. Then usually I'd take a nap or something. And but that day, for whatever reason, I just had my little notebook, and I just wrote down a list of like 20 or 30 names that I thought were like morbid or gory or whatever. And I took it to my dad's house where we would play in the garage. And we just looked down the list, and that was sort of the one name that nobody hated. And it was like, hey, cool, we're Exhumed. Because I thought like, what, who are bands that I like? And I was like, I like Entombed. What's the opposite of Entombed? Oh, Exhumed, like Exhumed and Consumed by Carcass. Like, oh, that's great. And that was really the entire level of thought that was put into it. Like, it was nothing deeper than that,
Totally. Oh, okay. So just walk me through. So after choosing the name and getting the guys in the actual band, I'm assuming these guys were, friends of yours from high school and
Right.
whatnot, like Carl Jones and those guys. So just walk me through just going in the recording studio for the first time. What was and I don't know, just the whole vibe and experience of walking into a recording studio. It's a big deal for a 15, 16-year-old kid.
Yeah. I think we recorded our first studio demo in January '92, so I'd been 16 for about 3 months. And we always recorded back in the day at a place called House of Faith in Palo Alto, which became sort of famous-ish. Like the guy Bart Thurber that recorded there, he recorded like Spaz and Plutocracy, and the big claim to fame, I think, when we went there in '92 is that he had recorded the Neurosis. I don't know if it was Pain of Mind, but whatever it was that got them signed to Alternative Tentacles, he had recorded that. And it was like, wow, like, holy shit. And, Bart was a really good producer. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. But we were kind of just in awe of the whole thing. And it was a 16-track studio, which just seemed like, nowadays, of course, recording digitally, you have pretty much infinite tracks. You can have 1,600 tracks if you want. But it was just really cool, like hearing your stuff back through the monitors and everything else. It was just like, wow, we were very impressed with ourselves. But we didn't really have any idea of like how to approach a recording, and we didn't really have a lot of, we just didn't have a lot of like proper musical grounding. So it really was kind of like any given day. Like, the first demo we did came out really pretty decently, and the second thing we did came out pretty good. The third one was kind of It just depended on how we were feeling that day. And of course, we only would have one day to like record and mix, and then you just leave with a cassette, and you have a dubbing tape deck, and you're off to the races. That was about it,
And you obviously, like, the tapes got around because you've done multiple splits and multiple demos, so your tapes were probably going around everywhere because it was the tape trading days. But I'm kind of curious why the heavier style around that time too, because you mentioned Carcass,
sure,
and Entombed and stuff. So I'm assuming you just wanted the heavier style just offered more to you than just playing Metallica.
Well, I mean, I think. Like before I heard Master Puppets, I mean, I liked like, Ozzy and Quiet Riot and Twisted Sister and stuff. And I had a few tapes. I was also really into like Run DMC and Beastie Boys, like the early LL Cool J stuff. But when I heard Master Puppets, I was like, this is the first thing that sort of matches like what I'm feeling inside, like the angst of puberty and just the anger and the frustration. And, that was really sort of what resonated with me. And I got into metal in, I guess it would have been '87, which was kind of the tail end of the sort of faster equals better. That's what people thought, like there was that phase from about 84, 85 to '87 when it was all about speed. And, people would be like, oh, Metallica's great. And then, Hello Eights would come out and they'd be like, oh, fuck Lars Ulrich, Dave Lombardo's way faster. Like, this guy's faster. Is Creator faster than Slayer? Is Cryptic Slaughter faster than them? Is Death faster than whoever?
Dark Angel and all those bands. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And that was like all my shit. That was like what I was really excited about. And the point for me of death metal like wasn't about like being eerie or sludgy. It was just about, this is the kind of music where finally you can play as fast as possible. And really, I didn't care if it was death metal or grindcore. Like, we all listened to Napalm Death and Extreme Noise Terror and Sore Throat, Repulsion, of course, Terrorizer, of course. And so to me, I didn't really give a shit if it was death metal, if it was grindcore, if it was somewhere in the middle. I was like, as long as it's an excuse to play as fast as possible, then that's what I'm about, you know?
Okay.
And that was what got me the most excited, was just like, and it's still that way. I'm always like, well, we can play faster. Like, if someone needs a fast part, like, you know,
well, yeah,
that was like,
but as time went on, you added more dynamics to it,
sure.
you know, which is what I always loved about extreme music, was you can have as many dynamics as you want. And nobody can tell you differently.
You can go as fast as you want. You can go as slow as you want.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's just kind of like, you know, the fast stuff's always my favorite, but it's just like, it's like anything, man. You get numb after a while. But pizza's your favorite food. If you eat pizza every night,
it gets a little stale. Yeah.
Right. You need to break it up and then like, oh, I love pizza. I'm looking forward to this. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Well,
that's just learning.
It kind of walked me through just the 7 years of demos and splits, and then like getting signed for the first time.
Well, we were very much a high school band. We really had no clue what we were doing. We had no concept of like, you know, that there's a business aspect to anything. And we sort of assumed that at some point we were going to meet somebody that was going to take that on, and then that would just be a thing, or that we would get signed to a record label and then that would sort of take care of itself. And, you know, like any like young band of, you know, kids, we had a lot of lineup changes, and, you know, kids, you know, when you're in high school, like one year you're into death metal, the next you're like, well, now I just smoke a lot of weed and I just want to like, you know, make beats on my Tascam drum machine or whatever. Like, okay, now we got to find somebody else. Like, oh, this guy, like now he's like doing meth and didn't come to practice. Like, all right, well now we got to find somewhere else. And, you know, it really wasn't until like we lucked out when we first started, because you could do these pay to play gigs, and the clubs loved us because we always showed up. We always paid them the money that we were supposed to pay, whether we sold the tickets or not. None of us really drank a lot of alcohol, so we weren't causing trouble. We weren't, you know, we were just like 17-year-old kids who were just like, oh my God, we're playing with Cannibal Corpse. That was like, you know, the best thing we can imagine. And so we got a lot of gigs. And then right around 93, like right after I graduated high school, there was a shooting at one of the venues, and there were 3 main venues that were all owned by the same company. And it became a big thing, and then the venue shut down, and then they reopened a little bit, and then they shut down completely. And all of a sudden we'd gone from being a band that played the same 3 clubs and had a gig every month, you know, maybe 2 gigs a month, one of them opening for a national act, to now having nowhere to play, no contacts. And the guy that had been like booking our shows in the band had left the band. So it was like, we basically started from scratch again in 94 when Ross joined. Thankfully, Ross is a very smart guy. And from the beginning, he sort of was like, okay, I'm going to do the mail now. I'm going to send out these tapes. I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to get us this show. Like, yeah, it's not playing with Morbid Angel, but it's a show. Like, otherwise we're just sitting around doing nothing. And so we kind of started again in 94. And thankfully, we had a guy named Matt Widener join the band, who later played in Cretin and County Medical Examiners and various other things. And he was a very good musician. So Ross and Matt Widener coming in really helped Cole, Daryl, and myself out, because Ross was a bit smarter about the big picture. Matt Widener was a bit smarter about how to actually, like, you know, count. like, wait, you got to count? There's like beats and you just count them? You just stand there and count? He's like, yeah, you just count. I was like, whoa, holy shit. I've been playing guitar for 5 years. I never knew you had to count. And so sort of between those two in 94, things kind of got going. And then we did the split with Hemdale, and we were doing various 7 inches. And then finally, you know, basically, not to make a long story into a saga, but we did the Hemdale split on a label called Visceral Productions. And they were a very big up and coming like death metal label in the mid 90s. They were from Ohio, which is sort of where death metal was still popular. And Incantation had left Relapse, and Visceral had snagged Incantation. It was a huge deal in the underground. They also did the very first Nile EP, Ramsey's Bringer of War. And they were doing us, Hemdale, Scattered Remnants, and Nile and Incantation. Anyway, the distro kept getting bigger and bigger. So Relapse basically looked at them the way that Facebook looked at Instagram and was like, well, we're the biggest American mail order. Why don't we buy these guys out while we can? And so they bought the entire company, and they basically had the option to either sign us outright or release us. And thankfully, Matt Jacobson, the guy who owns Relapse, his roommate was a guy named Tom Haley, who also worked at the label, and he was a big Exhumed fan. And so that was how it wasn't like they scouted us like, we want Exhumed. It was like, well, we can get Exhumed. And the owner's roommate's like, dude, yes, we should. And so then, therefore, we got a record deal.
Okay. I wonder what it was that you offered them that maybe most of those bands didn't, because, there's Relapse is a known fucking extreme metal label, so, and especially around the late 90s and whatnot, most bands are playing what you guys coined as like the gore metal stuff, which would be, the first record of pretty much your entire career.
Right.
Now walk me through the recording process of this, and it's really raw. I mean, it's super raw. So
it's really something. Well, basically, we still were really like operating not that differently from a high school band at that time. I don't know that we did the split with Hemdale, and we went to Europe, and we did like 11 shows or something, and it didn't go great. We didn't feel like we were playing that good. It was just, the vibe wasn't that good. So at the time, it was just Ross, Cole, and myself. And we were like, we need another guitar player. We came back, we got Mike Beams, who played with some friends of ours in the Gilroy band. And that really helped. But he kind of came in, we had like 2 months until we were supposed to start recording or something. So it only helped so much. And we went in the studio and we recorded with one guy, this dude named Maurice, and then we took it to James Murphy to mix it. And as we were recording, we just didn't really have an interest in like learning about the technology of recording or the techniques, or we wouldn't know of a fucking SM57 from a vibrator. Like, we didn't know anything. And everything that we were doing, Maurice kept going, oh, you fix it in the mix. You just fix it. Oh, yeah, no, that you don't have to worry about that. That happens in the mix. And so we brought these tracks to James, who's like, one of my guitar heroes. And he's like, what the fuck is wrong with these tracks? We're like, I don't know. He said he was going to fix it in the mix. And he was just like, oh, my God. And I think, this is like maybe, I don't know if it was Pro Tools yet or not, but it was when ADATs were like a big thing. Everybody was using ADATs. And anyway, so James was constantly like at war with his gear and at war with the way the tracks were set up. And, it became clear after a couple of days that the record was not going to sound the way we imagined it at all. And, it was just basically kind of, we handed him a turd to polish, and he did what he thought was best, which in hindsight, I would have said, let's do it a different way. But, that's 20 something years ago. So who knows? And so at the end of the day, none of us really, I think Mike Beams was the only person that was really happy with the first record, because he had just joined this band. We got signed, we made a record. So he's like, hey, everything's going killer. Whereas, Cole and I had been doing it for 7 years. Ross had been there for 4 years. And we're like leading up to this big moment. And we're like, oh, it sucks. And we turned it into a label, and we're like, let's see what you can do with it. That was really the vibe at the time. And we were all pretty unhappy.
Well, I mean, it did a lot for the scene, though, when it first came out. I mean, there's nothing really like it at that time.
Right. I mean, for better or for worse, there was nothing like it. Really, it was we were in a very lonely place as a band in the late 90s. Like, the only bands that we kind of had a lot in common with were like Hemorrhage and maybe like Regurgitate and Dead Infection and CSSO, who were all overseas bands. And not only that, we were in California, whereas like the scene was all on the East Coast for death metal at that time. Like, we were playing like community centers and shit like that. And, we were doing all this stuff on stage. We were fucking spewing worms on people, and like Ross was like cutting himself and bleeding on people and just doing all this crazy shit. Like we bring like real animal bones and bash them on the stage, and people were like, yeah, I don't know, death metal's lame. I'm into black metal now. We're like, fuck, man. So anyway, so we just felt sort of isolated around that whole time. And it wasn't really until like 99, 2000 when we kind of realized, oh, we actually have like fans and stuff. This is weird.
Well, right. Well, even a little bit before that, though, you had started Decapitator around like the mid 90s. And I'm just kind of curious. I've always wanted to ask you this: is why start a thrash band like this in 19, essentially 96, 97?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it was 96.
The thrash scene was kind of
there
dead.
was no thrash scene.
So,
I think, it's a lot of things, the 90s had a lot of stylistic changes in the underground. And like the death metal that we were into, which was like Napalm Death, Entombed, Carcass, by 1994 didn't exist. Napalm was like doing like industrial stuff. Carcass was doing death and roll and broke up. Entombed was doing death and roll. Terrorizer only made one album. And as much as I love Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel and Suffocation, that wasn't sort of our main wheelhouse. We wanted to be more like a British type band. And so it just felt like all the bands that I really liked the most had moved away from the genre. Like Death wasn't really, by the time Symbolic came out, it was so different from the first couple of records. It just seemed like everybody had moved away from what we really liked doing. And then the whole scene shifted into like Norwegian black metal. And I liked some of it at the time. It didn't really stick with me, but I liked a little bit at the time and even less now. And I still was totally into metal, but nothing was really like getting me excited. So we went backwards, I like music that's really energetic and upbeat in general, as far as metal goes. I like a lot of like really sleep inducing other music, but metal I like to get my adrenaline up and going, and like thrash scratches that itch, and it was something that people didn't like, so it's kind of just our own little thing. And we would go to record stores and just, all the records I have, all my old 80s records I bought for like $5-6, like the first 3 Corner albums I got for like $4 or $5 each, and every Venom record was like $5 and shit. Nobody wanted this stuff. And so we started collecting records, and we started getting really, really into thrash. And it was just like our sort of fun outlet, and that's kind of how Decapitator started. I think we had a lot of like weird internal feuds. So I think for a while, like me and Cole didn't like Ross. So me and Cole would go practice without Ross, and we would play like Decapitator songs. And then I liked Ross and hated Cole, or it was just little kid shit, But so that was kind of how it started.
And walk me through just your writing process with a Decapitator track as opposed to an Exhumed track.
Now usually I can just tell right away, but I think even back then I had 2 guitars maybe, or I don't know. It's like if I was going to play Decapitator, you pick up you just pick up the guitar tuned to E, and they're like, oh, away we go. But I mean, even by like the mid 90s, late 90s, I was already sort of thinking of things in terms of like a rock song, song. Everything is a verse, a chorus, a verse, a chorus, a bridge, a chorus, and then you got a song. And so, usually once you get like the first riff or 2, and then like once you get a title, you're like 90% of the way done with the song. You're like, cool, this song is called X. It's got 2 parts. All right, cool. I've made up 1 or 2 other things like that. Now I need a part that contrasts it. Like, all right, you're done. And Decapitator was fun because you just would be like, all those titles that are so cliche now, you just be like, Nuclear Abomination. Cool, that's a good song title. Like, Strike of the Hell Monster. Like, all right, great, write that down. And, we just like goof on this stuff that was like really fun. And we knew it was cliche and corny, but it was the kind of corny shit that we liked,
I think that's why it works so well. I remember specifically hearing this album that we're going to talk about, which is the "We Will Destroy You Obey" record. And this song specifically, "Release the Dogs," is one of my all-time favorites, probably of your career.
Thanks.
Just because I love the chorus of it. It fucking rules. And your approach to it too is a little bit less guttural, but it still works.
Yeah.
It still works with the kind of riffing you guys were writing around that time. And walk me through the recording process. This was done up in your neck of the woods.
Yeah. Well, we went back to James Murphy for this record, but this time we're like, yo, we want to do a record. We're not going to have a lot of money, but we want you just to do it from start to finish. And he's like, I want to do it from start to finish too, because gore metal was fucked up. And I feel bad because I don't want you guys to think I'm a shitty engineer. And so we went and we recorded, I think the drums we tracked in like somebody's bedroom. It was like, it might have even been the engineer from Gore Metal, I think, because he helped a little bit. I think it was his girlfriend's bedroom that we tracked the drums in. And she was just laying on the bed with like earplugs in, like reading a magazine. Cole's like, the good. And, but, you know, we had James there the whole time. And so it turned out great. I mean, like, it really couldn't have turned out much better if we tried. That was the first time I was like, wow, I have this album and I like really like it. And it's like my side band. All right. But yeah, wow. I mean, it was just it was really fun. And compared to gore metal, like we felt like we learned a lot and we felt much better doing that record, you know?
Yeah, and it's a more traditional style of writing metal as opposed to say gore metal, because gore metal was more the 1-2 punch, you know, the 1 minute, 2 minute bangers, and you know, writing full songs with solos and whatnot. So, you know, it's two entirely different styles of writing. I think that's pretty much been your whole career, is like the two styles of writing like that.
Well, you know, my thing is like, if I'm going to do a project or whatever, like I don't want to do a project that's scratching the same itch as something else I'm already doing. You know what I mean? Like when Ghoul first came out, a lot of people were like, oh, I heard your new band, Ghoul. I'm like, dude, I'm not in Ghoul. It's because officially the first Ghoul record sounds pretty Exhumed-ish. And I'm like, I'm not in that band. Like I would just make an Exhumed song. I wouldn't make another band to do that. That's silly. And they're like, okay. And I was like, no, I'm not in the fucking band. And it's definitely lessened over the years. But yeah, I mean, I just try to make everything that I do to be its own unique entity. Its own, not unique in the bigger scheme, but within my world of projects.
Well,
you know?
And I mean, you do have, which we'll get to on part 2, which you do have Gruesome, which is kind of like Ghoul as well for you specifically. Now, you know, recording Slaughter Cult and your approach compared to gore metal, what did you learn that you did differently on Slaughter Cult?
Well, we knew, you know, we wanted to get a totally different kind of producer and everything. That was really important. Ross had left the band. You know, he was fired or whatever. And Ross was, you know, very into like, oh, we're going to do this kind of intro and use this sound effect. And we're like, we're not doing any of that shit. We knew after kind of getting out and playing a lot of shows and playing with like Nile and Dying Fetus and sort of the bands that were coming up at the same time, one thing that we knew is like we just didn't want the record to have a lot of double bass, because it was like all death metal at that time was saturated with double bass. And we're like, okay, cool. So let's just do the least amount of double bass we can do on an entire album. That's what we want to do. And we met Mieshko Talarczyk from Nasum. We were all big Nasum fans. And I remember hearing Inhale Exhale, and I was just like, God, I couldn't stop listening to it. And I just thought, if only we could get this guy to record our album. Like, fuck. And we played with Nasum. We played like 10 shows with him in 99. And we met Mieshko right after the first gig in Milwaukee Metal Fest. And he came up to us and we're like, hey, you know, like we're big fans, like really great to meet you. And he's like, yeah, I actually really liked your set. He's like, I heard your record. And I was like, I can't tell if these guys are either awesome or terrible, but I think you guys are awesome. And why don't you record the next record with me and I'll fucking fix that shit. And we're like, holy shit. Like, you know, and so we had him fly out to the Bay Area and we recorded at the studio built by the guys from Vile. And I always remember Juan, the singer for Vile, who's one of the engineers there. He kept, basically he's there. He shows me, here's this, here's that, here's blah, blah, blah. And then we're like, okay, now like just fuck off. Like, let's let us work. And he kept sort of hanging around, and we were recording the bass, and Juan's like, okay, well, hold on. Let me show you. And Mieshko's like, no, dude, this is how it's supposed to sound. And he's like, well, you don't want to do that because blah, 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 blah. And finally, Mieshko was like, it's fucking grindcore. That's what the bass sounds like. Get the fuck out of here. Like, we paid you to use the studio, not to fucking hear you. And I was just like, wow, like really taken aback. We're all like Californians, like, hey, man, it's cool, bro. And he's like, no, just get the fuck out of here. And he left. And I was like, wow. And it was really smooth. Like we got done a day early. Like the last day Mieshko was here, like he was like looking for like Doom action figures, like the video game or something. So we just drove around like buying action figures and like getting drunk.
That rules.
Yeah, it was like night and day, And I love the way that record sounds. I don't know that it sounds good, but it sounds the right way. It's like, it's so abrasive and it's so sonically harsh intentionally this time, not like the first record, which is sonically harsh just because of whatever. So yeah, and it was really cool. Obviously Mieshko died several years later in the tsunami. So I'm especially glad that we got to make a record with him before that happened. But yeah.
Absolutely. Now let's go back to Decapitator. I just got to say this too. It kind of predates the whole new wave of thrash thing
right.
that came out during that time. And I'm just kind of curious, for you, did you start to notice when you started to notice these bands coming up, did you immediately kind of want to go back to doing more Decapitator stuff?
I think it was sort of weird. Like I remember when Muni Waste came out to the West Coast first time, we had a lot of friends in like the punk, the hardcore, like power violence scene. For whatever reason, the show that they were playing, nobody in our circle went to. But my buddy, Jason from Agents of Satan, he was like, you got to hear this fucking band. Like, you're going to lose your shit. And he played me Waste Them All. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, fuck yeah. And I didn't really think that much of it, I heard the first Toxic Holocaust record, and I was like, oh, this is pretty good. I think they got a lot better with like Overdose of Death, which I think is honestly like one of probably the better records of the last 20 years. But we didn't really think that much of it. Cole was really busy with school. He's now like a cancer research scientist who makes tons of money. So clearly he made the right decision. And between just trying to tour and work and Cole's, finishing up college and stuff, we didn't really have a lot of time for Decapitator, and I think we didn't really realize the potential of what those bands were doing. Like we never thought about it like that. I was kind of like shocked a few years later at how marketable what they were doing was. And I was like, well, if I would have known that, I probably would have invested a little bit more time in this. But I mean, because it's not like I don't like the music, but it just was, it was something that we did completely for ourselves, and we didn't really put a lot of thought into,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now they say the third album is always like the best album in a band's career. I wouldn't say this is necessarily the best Exhumed record. To me, this is one of my favorite Exhumed records. Let's talk a little bit about the Anatomy is Destiny. And this you kind of brought some Decapitator roots into the songwriting process. And what I mean by this is like, it wasn't just these 1-2 punches. It was like these 3-4 minute songs. I remember specifically, and this is back when YouTube was like brand spanking new, right? One of the first videos I ever saw was the Matter of Splatter one. And black and white, didn't know who these guys were. It was like, what the fuck is this? I think the heaviest thing that I had heard was like lack of comprehension from Death. So hearing Exhumed's Matter of Splatter, it was like, this is fucking awesome.
Well, it's definitely heavier. I don't think it's better, but it's definitely heavier.
No. I didn't say better. I said the heaviest.
I know.
Right. But I'm saying in terms, and I was 12, 13, 14 years old, so hearing this
awesome.
made a huge impact on me personally. And I'm just kind of curious for you, changing your writing style for the Anatomy is Destiny record. What were you guys going for in terms of either a sonic kind of vibe for Exhumed, or just wanting to be more commercially viable in the extreme metal world?
It was several different things. I feel like, the first album was overreaching. We try to do certain songs, we try to do longer, introduce, bits of like melodic stuff, but just the way it came across, nobody would ever know. And, we felt like the second album succeeded. Like we went in, we wanted to do X, we came out with X. We're like, all right, cool. And so it's like, great, now we can do something different. And, there was a bunch of things that, reading the press for the first two albums, people kept being like, oh, these guys sound like Carcass. And we really felt like Slaughter Cult didn't sound anything like Carcass whatsoever. And we realized that whatever we did, people were going to compare us to them. And so certain riffs that we might not have used before, we're just like, well, kind of sounds like Carcass. Like Under the Knife has a whole bridge section that's like really Carcassy. And we're like, it doesn't matter what we do. We can just play Mary Had a Little Lamb and people will be like, oh, it's like Carcass. So whatever. If we have a riff that reminds us of Carcass, we'll just use it. And then I spent a lot of time with our old bass player and later guitar player, Bud, while we were out for Slaughter Cult. And he was a music student at UC Santa Barbara. And so he was walking me through like what would be like your first semester of music theory. I've like been playing guitar at this point for, 12, 13 years, already made a couple records. And he's like, so this is how we build scales, and this is how we build harmonies, and this is what intervals are. And I was like, whoa. And so all of a sudden I had all these new like tools in my toolbox. And I think, we done what we set out to do with the second record, and we wanted to sort of prove that like it's not just a bunch of racket, like we actually we're playing stuff that is musical, and we're capable of playing stuff that's musical, and that's why we got Neil Kernan. The label kind of pitched a couple of different people to us, and we were like, wow, we had the budget for Neil Kernan. Like, fuck, this guy recorded Hall & Oates, like we should get him. And we rehearsed like all the fucking time for that record. And I remember at the time I just gone through like two sort of like back-to-back, like really gnarly breakups. And so all I would do is I would go to work, then I would go to practice, and then I would go home and I'd just play guitar. And I was playing for like, 4 hours a day, on average. And I would just be like, okay, cool. Like, I just came back home from band practice, and now I'm just going to play like Master of Puppets, like the whole album. Like, and it's probably the best my guitar playing has maybe ever been, just in terms of like physical skill. Was right around 2004, 2003, and so that was we just really wanted to do something that was musical and prove that we weren't just a bunch of noise.
Yeah, that and I would kind of agree with you, just in terms of, because that record's really a tough record to try and play. Like the riffs or at least for Matter of Splatter, I mean, even though there's like a huge nod to Damage Incorporated and
Right.
and stuff, like, 'cause, I mean, but just even like you playing and singing over that shit is tough.
I think so too.
I don't know
I'm
how
glad someone else does.
Well, I don't know how you do it over some of those riffs. I know you were asking me the same thing on mine, but it's like I don't know how you guys do that.
We didn't even have a PA when we were writing that album. So I'd be at work, and I would type out the lyrics, I'd print them out, and I just put them on the wall. And I would just stand there, and thankfully we were playing so much, we're practicing all the time, that I could play the songs pretty much in my sleep. So I would just read the lyrics, and if I can talk the lyrics, then I can growl the lyrics. So I would just sit there and talk the lyrics through while I was playing in the jam room. We were playing in like a storage space in Fremont at the time, and Yeah, we just practiced a fucking lot, you know, and especially listening back to that record, the Cole, you know, he's never been like a metered drummer. Like he doesn't, clearly the guy is like allergic to a metronome, you know, listening to the Slayer beats are up here and the blast beats are up here. And then there's like the tempos are all over the place. And, you know, I couldn't play along with that album now if I tried, but because we played with him day after day after day after day, we all knew like, oh, this is sort of, it slows down here and then it speeds back up. And we all just sort of like went with it and it worked because we practiced all the time, you know. And we had Neil Kernan.
That's true. Now walk me through the just getting the album cover together and not having the Exhumed logo on it, because this is one of the only ones in your in the career that doesn't have the specific logo. So I'm just kind of curious what your concept for it was. With, did you give them the music and say do something with this, or?
No, we actually, there's a book of surgical photography called The Sacred Heart. It's just a collection of medical photography, and it's got all kinds of stuff from transplants and lung surgery and knee replacement and gender reassignment. And then the back cover is just that shot of the eye. In fact, the Sacred Reich, what was that album, Heal or whatever, where they had that knee, that's from that same photographer. Anyway, I saw that eyeball and I just thought like that was a really striking image. And I, you know, the label, whatever, procured the rights to use it. And I just thought it was clean. It was like one thing you could really focus on, because our first two covers, especially the second, that's the one thing about Slaughter Cult is the album cover really sucks, which is totally our fault. But, you know, it didn't really have like a focal point. Like from a design standpoint, it's just like stuff. And so I wanted to make something that was like really visually clean and striking and compositionally sound. It was like cool. And the first version that they gave us had the logo on it. And I just thought like, it's just kind of getting in the way, you know, like just, that's it. And that way, you know, it looked different. So people kind of knew to expect something different, you know. And actually one thing I should say about that record, and I never would have said it back then, which is, I guess, the only reason I feel it's important to say now, is that Impaled was doing Mondo Medicale, and they were sort of like the Megadeth to our Metallica. And that record was like really like, you know, I thought the production was kind of like not aggressive, but the music itself was really sophisticated. And I was like, well, I'm not going to fucking have them make a, you know, a more sophisticated record than us. Like, fuck that shit. And I never would have admitted that in a million years back then, but now it doesn't matter at all. Now it's just funny. But I think that is important to cite.
Well, absolutely. And there was always a correlation with Impaled and Exhumed.
Sure.
Me and
Ross gets fired from Exhumed, joins Impaled. Leon gets fired from Exhumed, joins Impaled. Like, you know, that was just sort of the way it went.
Well, like I was mentioning with Gruesome and whatnot, it's kind of like you and Ross almost have the same kind of career. Like you're on like a parallel plane,
right?
I'm waiting for Ross to kind of do a traditional heavy metal thing, but you know, but regarding the Anatomy is Destiny record, choosing, I guess, just the music video, why black and white? And I think this is the first one for you personally, right? This is your first music video.
You know, basically, we didn't really have much of a budget. We rented out this venue, this really small club in San Jose, and just filmed there all day, and then intercut it with, I think, some footage from our tour in Japan, our Slaughter Cult tour in Japan, and just some other random stuff. And again, like, none of us in the band really liked the video. And I think putting it in black and white sort of covered up some of the crappy, like, cinematography and stuff. And yeah, it was one of, like, I you know, we've always had all these concepts, and the lyrics are fairly elaborate and all this stuff. And they're like, well, you got the budget to just make a performance video. Like, this is really not what we're about. But you know, a video that we're not that happy with is better than no video at all, especially because it was like MTV2, I think it had Headbangers Ball at the time. And there was like I can't remember if it was like the on-demand videos were a thing yet or not. But anyway, there was a market for it. And I think YouTube maybe was getting started. This is 2003.
That was way later. Yeah, YouTube was way later. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. But the label thought there was a market for it, and you know, so we made it, and none of us were particularly enthusiastic about it. But it obviously helped. You saw it, so somebody saw it.
Well,
the label got their money's worth, you know.
Totally. Well, it changed my whole world watching that fucking thing. I think it's just because too the atmosphere of it just matches the song so well, and like the overall grit to the tone of the guitars and the nasty fucking vocal style that you guys have. And I last thing I got to say about this record, I feel in terms of you vocally, it's really difficult for me to it would be really difficult for me to sing over this, especially with how long your screams are during this time. So you were kind of, in terms of your guitar playing and singing wise, I feel this is like the start to like the top of the heap for you.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, I think the main thing that I look back, especially vocally now, I think that the big problem with that record is that there's just too many fucking lyrics. And like there's lyrics all the time. And because I used to I would write lyrics and then I would write music and I would be like, does this lyric go with this song or whatever? And I would write all this shit. And I was like, this is so clever and it's so witty. Like, I can't cut this. I can't get rid of these lyrics. And after that record, I actually made a rule and I was like, I'm not writing any lyrics until there's music ever again. And I've stuck by it because I mean, I'll write down like, oh, that's a good idea for a song title, or like, that's a good rhyme, and I'll make a note of it. But, you know, I used to just have like binders full of like lyrics about shit. And, you know, I think that was the one thing that kind of held the album back, is that like Slaughter Cold and Gore Metal both have like big choruses. I mean, even though they're like 2-minute songs, they've got these like discernible choruses, whereas Anatomy is Destiny, like, here's the chorus, it's these 16 lines that repeat, and it's like, yeah, that's too complicated, dude, you know.
Well, I would argue Grotesqueries doesn't really have a big old chorus. It's just you screaming Grotesqueries for like literally almost a minute long.
Because Mike Beams wrote that song and I wrote the lyrics after.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, oh, this works better. Like, fuck. But I didn't really realize that until the record had been done for a while. So hindsight's 2020.
Absolutely. I think it's a fucking great record.
Well,
it's still top 2 or 3 for me in terms of the Exhumed catalog.
Cool.
Let's end it there since it's been an hour.
Okay. Oh yeah. Well, shit.
We'll pick it up. We'll pick up where we left off on Garbage Days Regurgitated next time, and when you joined Repulsion for a few years, we'll pick it up there. So yeah, Matt, awesome. I really appreciate you giving me a couple minutes of your time, and let's do a part 2, man. I really would love to talk more shop on your career.
Yeah, fuck yeah, man. Awesome. I mean, shit, if I keep talking like this, I'm going to do part 3. I need to shut up.
No way, dude. We'll do part 3 if you want, dude.
No, This is great, man. This has actually been really fun. Like some of the stuff, like cold tracking and the Decapitator drums in Mo and Maurice's girlfriend's bedroom. I totally forgot about that. I haven't thought about that in 20 years. So
I bet she was reading like a Cosmopolitan.
She was
or
like
17
or whatever. Yeah,
some 17 magazine or something.
Oh, good.
That's awesome. But yeah, man, give us some links real quick before we get out of here. At least let's do that.
Yeah,
and we'll do a part 2 maybe in the next week or 2 whenever you have time. So
sure. Yeah. So I have my own website, mattharveymustbedestroyed.com. I just thought it was easier than like trying to get an Exhumed site and a Gruesome site and a Pounder site and so on and so forth. Exhumed, Gruesome, and Pounder can all be found on Facebook, Instagram. Exhumed is on Twitter as well. I believe it's Exhumed_official. We have a YouTube channel, which is /official Exhumed. And we have a merch store, most importantly, because this is the site where you can buy stuff, which is exhumed.bigcartel.com. I have stuff from Exhumed, from Decapitator, from Pounder, from Gruesome, and various things there that involve me. And yeah, I think that about covers it.
Absolutely. Well, for another edition of Poppitt's Corner, I'm out of here, guys. Cheers.
Cheers, bud.